Picture this: the smoky haze of a 1917's backstage lounge, the echoes of a sold-out crowd still vibrating through the walls, and two of the era's most iconic voices, Linda Ronstadt and Joni Mitchell, sharing the same air but worlds apart in spirit. On the surface, they were both trailblazing women in a male-dominated industry, celebrated for their artistry, independence, and fearless authenticity. But behind the ethereal melodies and poetic lyrics lay a simmering tension, fueled by ego clashes, creative rivalries, and personal betrayals. Today, Linda Ronstadt has shattered the carefully curated illusion, opening up about her long-standing conflict with Joni Mitchell, exposing the fractures beneath the facade of folk rock harmony. This isn't just a story of two legendary artists clashing over music. It's a saga of pride, ambition, and the dark undercurrents that run beneath the glittering surface of fame. But Mitchell's feud with Ronstadt is only the beginning. As we peel back the layers, we uncover a life marked by scandals, personal struggles, and fiery conflicts with some of the biggest names in music history. This is the untold story of Joni Mitchell, brilliant, complicated, and unapologetically human. Think of this: two women standing at the pinnacle of their careers, both celebrated for their unmatched vocal talents and fierce independence. Yet instead of camaraderie, there was only tension. The feud between Linda Ronstadt and Joni Mitchell wasn't born overnight. It simmered beneath polite interviews and award show smiles, rooted in artistic jealousy, personality clashes, and conflicting views on what it meant to be a female artist in a world dominated by men. Ronstadt admired Mitchell's songwriting, but often criticized her for being arrogant and dismissive of other artists. Mitchell, on the other hand, saw Ronstadt as too commercial, accusing her of lacking the depth and authenticity that she believed defined real artistry. Their paths crossed frequently: festivals, recording studios, mutual friends, and each encounter only deepened the divide. Behind the scenes, they traded barbed comments and icy stares, their rivalry becoming an open secret in the industry. But this wasn't just professional jealousy, it was personal. Mitchell reportedly looked down on Ronstadt's mainstream success, while Ronstadt resented Mitchell's condescending attitude. Their feud spilled into the press subtly, with thinly veiled critiques in interviews, creating a cold war of words that lasted for decades. While her clash with Ronstadt was intense, it was far from the only conflict in Mitchell's tumultuous career. Joni Mitchell was notorious for her sharp tongue and refusal to conform, traits that often put her at odds with her peers. She had a legendary falling out with David Crosby, one of her early champions. Their relationship, both personal and professional, clashed with Mitchell's fierce independence. The friendship that once fueled creative collaborations turned into bitter resentment. Her rivalry with Bob Dylan was equally dramatic. Although both were icons of the folk movement, Mitchell often criticized Dylan for what she saw as his lack of authenticity, calling his public persona a carefully crafted act. Dylan, never one to back down from criticism, returned the favor with dismissive remarks about Mitchell's music, sparking a feud that divided fans and fueled tabloid headlines. Even her romantic entanglements were fraught with conflict. Her tumultuous relationship with Graham Nash of Crosby, Stills and Nash ended in heartbreak and bitterness, leaving emotional scars that found their way into her music. Nash later described their breakup as devastating, hinting at Mitchell's cold, unyielding nature when it came to matters of the heart. Behind the brilliance of Joni Mitchell's music was a woman grappling with deep personal struggles. Fame was both a blessing and a curse, amplifying her insecurities and fueling a lifelong battle with isolation and depression. Despite her public persona as a free-spirited artist, Mitchell's private life was marked by loneliness and emotional turmoil. One of the most heart-wrenching chapters in her life was her decision to give up her daughter for adoption in the 1960s, a secret she kept hidden for decades. The emotional weight of that choice haunted her, influencing some of her most haunting lyrics. When the truth finally emerged in the late 19teens, it reignited old wounds and strained her fragile reconciliation with her daughter, leaving behind a trail of unresolved pain. In the 2010s, Mitchell suffered a near-fatal brain aneurysm that left her struggling to regain basic functions. The once vibrant performer was suddenly dependent on others, her fierce independence shattered by physical vulnerability. The ordeal exposed not just her fragility, but also the isolation that had grown around her in her later years, a stark contrast to the adoring crowds she once commanded. Joni Mitchell wasn't just difficult behind closed doors. Her unapologetic nature often spilled into the public sphere, alienating fans and peers alike. She had a knack for speaking her mind, regardless of the consequences, which led to numerous controversies throughout her career. Her outspoken criticism of the music industry's commercialization didn't sit well with record executives, and her refusal to play the game cost her both radio airplay and commercial success in her later years. Mitchell's disdain for conformity extended beyond music. She was notoriously critical of feminism, despite being hailed as a feminist icon, causing confusion and backlash among her supporters. Even her artistic choices sparked controversy. When she shifted from folk to jazz in the late 70s, many fans felt betrayed. She dismissed their criticism with characteristic bluntness, widening the gap between herself and her audience. While her music evolved, her relationships often did not, leaving her increasingly isolated as she aged. Picture this: a woman whose voice could capture the ache of a generation, whose lyrics painted landscapes of heartbreak and hope with surgical precision, standing face to face with a stranger who happened to be her own daughter. For all of Joni Mitchell's poetic prowess, there were no words delicate enough to heal the wounds left by decades of absence. The reunion with her long-lost daughter Killorin Gibb was meant to be a moment of redemption, a closing of the circle. But instead of the heartwarming fairy tale the world romanticized, it unfolded as a raw, unfiltered drama filled with emotional landmines, bitter confrontations, and the suffocating weight of unspoken regrets. The distance between Joni and Killorin wasn't just physical, it was an ocean of unresolved pain. Imagine growing up without knowing your mother, only to discover she's not just any woman but an icon whose songs about loss and love echoed across the world, yet couldn't echo into your own life. When they finally met, it wasn't with the soft embrace of forgiveness, but with the jagged edges of two lives that had grown in opposite directions. Their interactions were often tense, marked by clashing personalities and deep-seated resentment. Killorin, grappling with feelings of abandonment, struggled to reconcile the myth of Joni Mitchell with the flawed, flesh-and-blood woman standing before her. And Joni, accustomed to being in control of her narrative, found herself powerless in the face of her daughter's pain. But the emotional turmoil didn't stop there. Mitchell's relationship with her own parents was a tapestry woven with threads of tension and disappointment. Growing up in the small town of Fort Macleod, Alberta, Joni felt trapped within the rigid expectations of her conservative household. Her parents, particularly her mother, Myrtle, were distant and emotionally reserved, raising Joni in an environment where creative expression was viewed with suspicion rather than support. There was little room for the wild, free-spirited soul that Joni would become. She often described her childhood as suffocating, filled with rules and restrictions that stifled her burgeoning artistic identity. Her decision to leave home and pursue music wasn't just an act of ambition, it was an act of rebellion. She turned her back on the conventional life her parents envisioned for her, chasing dreams that took her from coffee houses in Toronto to the stages of Laurel Canyon. But success didn't soften the emotional chasm between them. Even as she collected accolades, awards, and critical acclaim, the approval she craved most remained elusive. Fame, as it turned out, was no substitute for the warmth of unconditional parental support. Their rare reunions were awkward affairs, filled with forced pleasantries and unspoken grievances simmering just beneath the surface. The irony was cruel. Here was a woman capable of articulating the deepest human emotions in song, yet unable to navigate the messy, complicated terrain of her own family. She could pour her heart into lyrics that resonated with millions, but when it came to personal connections, she often kept her guard up, retreating behind layers of wit, sarcasm, and artistic superiority. The emotional neglect she experienced as a child seemed to bleed into her adult relationships, creating a cycle of distance and detachment that she couldn't escape. Perhaps the most tragic part of Joni's story is that while she sang about love with breathtaking vulnerability, she struggled to fully experience it in her personal life. Her family ties were frayed, stretched thin by years of separation, misunderstood intentions, and the unrelenting march of time. The reunion with Killorin didn't heal the past. it exposed it. Conversations turned into arguments. Attempts at bonding often collapsed under the weight of unresolved trauma. And the dream of reconciliation remained just that, a dream. In the quiet moments, away from the applause and the spotlight, Joni Mitchell was a woman haunted by the ghosts of what could have been. The daughter she gave up, the parents she could never quite please, the family she lost long before fame found her. These were the silent refrains of a life lived in both extraordinary brilliance and heartbreaking isolation. And no song, no matter how beautifully composed, could drown out the echoes of that personal pain. Joni Mitchell's life is a study in contrasts. An artist whose music touched millions, yet who struggled to maintain meaningful personal connections. Her feuds with Linda Ronstadt, Bob Dylan, David Crosby, and countless others weren't just petty rivalries, they were reflections of a deeper struggle with vulnerability, trust, and the cost of genius. Linda Ronstadt's revelations have forced the world to confront the complex, often contradictory nature of Joni Mitchell. She was a pioneer, a poet, a musical genius, but also a woman haunted by her past, alienated by her own pride, and isolated by the very brilliance that made her a legend. In the end, Mitchell's story isn't just about the conflicts and scandals that defined her career. It's about the fragile, flawed human being behind the iconic songs, a woman who gave the world her soul through music, but often kept her heart locked away, hidden behind a wall of brilliance and bitterness.